Thank you and welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this webinar on student voice, specifically calling it Every Student Has a Voice, but do we hear them? We're very lucky to be joined by a couple of speakers and guests today. So we are lucky to be joined by Dr. Russ Quaglia from the Quaglia Institute for School Voice and Aspirations, Sue Bryen from the Quaglia Institute as well, and we're also joined by Justin Roberts from the MacKillop Institute, which is also where I'm from. My name is Chris Higgins. I'm essentially going to be a little bit of your host and MC. So you're not going to see too much of me or hear too much of me. It's going to be the others, other special guests today. But I will just start us off with a little bit of housekeeping before we go too much further. So first of all, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we are all joining from today. So the MacKillop Institute and MacKillop Family Services, which we are part of, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands. We stand and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the memories, traditions, cultures, hopes and aspirations of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people all across this nation. And we acknowledge the grief and loss of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that they have endured from the harm caused by invasion and colonization over the last 200 plus years, resulting in historical, cultural, and intergenerational trauma. We recognize that these lands have been the lands of learning and teaching since the beginning of time, and we stand with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in solidarity now and always. So a little bit of housekeeping. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay now. I hope that everyone can hear me okay now anyway, but there are a few features in this webinar that you should be able to use. So first of all, you have got the chat function. So there's a chat function there that you can use if you do need any support. I'm going to disappear behind the scenes shortly, and I'll try and support people in the chat and also the Q&A function. I can see that there's already some amazing people in the chat, so thank you to those in the chat trying to help others with the sound and the speakers and the mic. We have turned most people's mics and cameras off just because we are expecting a good number of people attending this afternoon. So if you would like to ask a question specifically of our guests, please use the Q&A function to ask your question, and we'll be doing some Q&A at the end, and we'll pick out some of those questions and we'll pass them to our guest speakers. If you want to specifically ask your question of a specific person, please just say their name. If you can't use the Q&A function for any reason, please use the chat function. But if you can pop your question in the Q&A, that would be ideal. You should also have the raise hand function, but because we've got cameras, mics off, probably want to avoid using that one. So if I do see any little hands up, I'll assume it's probably an error and use the Q&A or the chat function instead. So back to our kind of main topic and over to introduce really our guests who are going to be talking to us about student voice today. So first of all, I would like to introduce Sue Bryen from the Quaglia Institute, and I'm going to hand over to Sue to introduce herself and her work and her career and a little bit about herself. And thank you so much for being here with us, Sue. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time. And over to you.
Thanks very much, Chris. It's an absolute delight to be with you today and have this conversation and connect with all you people out there. So my name is Sue Bryen, and I do work for the Quaglia Institute for School Voice and Aspirations. My background is very much as a teacher in teaching in education, and I was a teacher, an instructional leader, and a school principal. And I always felt there was something more that we needed to do to help students be the best they could be. I then moved out of schools into a professional learning role to work with schools around the visible learning work. And when I was working with students and seeking their voice, it really occurred to me that they don't know that they have a voice. A lot of students are not aware that they actually were born with a voice. And how can we support them in schools to use that voice to be the best version of themselves? So I approached Russ Quaglia and I said, you are an expert in this field, have been for decades. I really think your work is needed in Australia. So the partnership began. I've been doing this work for nearly 4 years now, really working with staff and students to understand absolutely that they have a voice and how they can partner with teachers and use that voice to become the best version of themselves. Thanks, Chris.
Fantastic, Sue, and what a wonderful background that you have. And again, thank you so much for giving us some of your time and your insights this afternoon. And then we are also joined by my wonderful colleague, Justin Roberts, and I am going to hand over to Justin to let him introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. It's as Sue said, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's to kind of be in conversation with so many people across the country, and also to be here with Sue. So my name's Justin. I am, at its heart, like Sue, I'm an educator. First, I'm a teacher, ex-school principal as well, but probably spent the first half of my career in mainstream education, with a particular interest in student wellbeing, and then have been lucky enough to spend the last decade in our MacKillop education schools, working with children and young people disengaged from mainstream education, which has been a wonderful experience. And I'm going to get to speak about some of the lessons that they taught me here today from that work. But now, lucky enough as National Program Director of Relate, to actually work with schools across the country and supporting them to implement the Relate education model, which is really about creating those safe, engaged and inclusive school environments, and walking that journey with them, providing professional learning and implementation support. So feel lucky every day to be in this work. I think education is a vocation, and so I know the importance of making this worth everyone's time, because of the important work that you do each and every day in your roles.
Beautiful. Thank you, Justin. And I might quickly introduce myself as well. My name is Chris Higgins, and I'm here at the MacKillop Institute, and my role is development and innovation. I get to work very closely with all the other program directors like Justin and support the amazing work that they're doing with schools, but more from the back end with things like our IT systems and support systems. So it's a bit more of a support role, making sure that that amazing work gets to happen. And I've previously had some roles in EdTech. I was a teacher and leader in schools before that, and I've also spent a little bit of time in other education not-for-profits before making my way here to the MacKillop Institute. And I'm very lucky that I have done a little bit of work with Sue over the past and with the Quaglia Institute and the amazing work that they're doing with schools all across Australia and other parts of the world around student voice and leadership, and also really lucky to work with Justin and the work he's doing with schools from MacKillop all across Australia as well to support student and staff well-being. And also just to mention, because Justin probably won't, and he'll go a little bit red, but he also did just get awarded one of the most influential educators of the year by the Educator magazine because of his dedication to some of our young people who have a range of challenges engaging with education, and he's been very passionate about those young people for the last 10 years, and got himself a nice little recognition. Are you going red yet, Justin?
Yes, very much so.
Sorry,
Chris.
I
Thank
apologize.
You.
I got to do the shout out. I've got to. I'm sorry. But to bring us to probably the main piece here is we are very, very fortunate that we are able to get some amazing insights today from Dr. Russ Quaglia, who obviously Sue works very, very closely with. And Russ has a long, distinguished career in student voice. Many of you have probably already heard of Dr. Russ Quaglia and the Quaglia Institute. Some of you may not have, but Russ started his work in the area of student voice and looking at, what is genuine, authentic student voice in schools in the 1980s. Obviously, a long time before I was born, this youthful face of mine. But 1986, Russ started exploring what student voice is, how schools do it, and how we can make sure that we are listening to and hearing every student's voice. And I know that I even just said how schools do it, and I know that that is something that's going to come up in this webinar. So we're going to explore what do we mean by student voice? What is it? Is it something you do? And how can we hear from every single student in our school and genuinely hear from them? Now, Russ, not only has he had a 40-year career in this and school leadership, he works all across America, the United States of America. He works across Australia with Sue, Dubai, the UK. He's written numerous books on the topics of student voice and leadership. And if you didn't know this, he also actually has recently written a children's book as well. Highly recommend that you check it out. Now, you might be wondering where Russ is at this point in time, and I'm just going to preface this that unfortunately Russ is currently on the east coast of the USA, and the time difference means that it is about 3 a.m. for him right now. So what we've actually had to do for this piece this afternoon is do a bit of a pre-recording of Russ. So Sue, Justin, and I jumped on a call with Russ earlier on and basically asked him the questions that we were intending to ask him live for this webinar anyway. And so what we're going to do is jump in, play you that recording, but then when we get to the end of it, we'll kind of stop in places. We'll have some discussion and question, just like we would if Russ was live here with us. And then will be the kind of main Q&A at the end. So without further ado, we're going to jump straight in with Russ now and really posing him the question of why is student voice important? Now, why is it important? Why is it important in schools? And why is it important to have a shared definition of voice? So why is it important, and why is it important to have a shared definition in our schools? And really, over to Russ.
Literally, 1986, I started working and writing around the importance of student voice and the impact it had. And a question that I get asked a lot is, why student voice? And without being flippant, it's just like, why not? Like, it only makes sense that we ask the people that we work with, not work for or work to, but work with, what are they thinking? What's their ideas? What's their input? And so when it comes to student voice, I never understand why this is like the program when this should be the reality. The reality that we're all in this together. Student voice isn't more important than teacher voice. It's just different. And I hear that a lot. But the kickback I get from a lot of educators is like, oh, you're so into student voice. You think it's so much more important than ours. I go, no, I don't. I know it's different than yours, which makes it important for me to hear it. But nowhere do I say student voice is more important than teacher voice or leader voice or parent voice. What I do say, it's different. And we need to listen to that because we don't have all the answers. We don't know what these students are going through. And so why not only ask them what they're thinking? But to your point, you said earlier, Chris, let's listen to it. Let's learn from it. And then let's lead together in how do we move that forward? Again, without taking away any of our own voices, because some people also think that providing students an opportunity to have a voice is like this zero-sum game. In other words, it's like, if I'm providing students an opportunity to have their voice, that must mean I'm losing mine. And I'm like, no, it's not a zero-sum game. There's plenty of voice to go around. I go, by providing students an opportunity to have a voice will only make the teacher voice that much louder, if you would, that much easier to listen to. So the notion of why student voice, because it makes sense, it makes common sense, it's respecting who we're working with, and then the data we have that speaks profoundly to the importance of voice. When students are perceived to have a voice, and this is important to understand, when they're perceived to have a voice, they're 32% more likely to have self-worth. And there's so much work out there now about this whole notion of self-worth and well-being. Well, the mere notion of a student thinking they have voice doesn't mean they have to have one. It means they think they have a voice. They're 32% more likely to have greater self-worth than students who don't think they have a voice. They're 38% more likely to be engaged in their learning. They're 43% more likely to have a sense of purpose. So this voice thing on the surface makes all sorts of common sense because we want to be listened to and learn from, but it also has data to support. If we want students to feel better about who they are, if we want students to have a sense of purpose, if we want students to be more meaningfully engaged, we need to incorporate this notion of student voice. And I know in Australia, you sneak the word agency in there on me, and that's okay. I've learned to accept. I don't like it, but I've learned to accept it because I am a flexible American, if there is such a thing. But I get it. I mean, I get the notion of voice and agency. I like to look at voice in the same kind of ilk, if you would, because I think people understand voice more than they do agency. But that's my bias. But that's a long answer to like why student voice.
That's certainly my experience with that word agency too, Russ, is that people don't fully understand it a lot of the time. But I will say you've given us great points around the importance to students, not only their schooling, but also their life.
Yes.
Why is it important to have a shared definition of voice, do you think?
Yeah, so Justin, that's the key question. And when we work in the schools, it's the number one thing we do. Well, actually, the number one thing we do is to say, this is why voice matters. And we get data to show it matters and common sense and case studies. But once that is sorted out, we need a common definition, because what happens is people sometimes think voice, there's a few things. They either think voice is something we give students, and I'm like, no, they have one. They have one. You might not be listening to it, but this isn't like divine intervention. Oh, you will have a voice. It makes me nuts when school says we're working on student voice. I go, no, you need to be working on teacher ears, because kids have a voice. They have a voice. We need to do a little better job listening. So the very first thing, just to your point, is we need a common understanding. And this is where I connect the voice and agency, because I get the agency thing, and I understand why that's in policy. But to your point, if I talk to a kindergartner, preschooler about agency, they're looking at me like I've got three heads. If I talk to parents I'm talking about student agency, they think, I don't know, the Secret Service is coming in somewhere. I'm like, no, I want to talk to you about voice, but we need a general understanding of what it is, because people's definition is so different. So we have three components: sharing thoughts and ideas in an environment underpinned by trust and respect. So on the surface, it's like, yeah, well, of course, people are sharing thoughts and ideas. The key piece is, in an environment underpinned by trust and respect. Now, I don't for a second believe we have an environment in schools underpinned by trust and respect. I think our educational system, ours, yours, and everyone else around the world, for that matter, is underpinned by testing and accountability. That's a fact. That's just a fact. Now, I'm not saying we get rid of testing, to get rid of accountability. I understand why people are in schools, but if we expect voice to be listened to and learned from, it really needs to be an environment underpinned by trust and respect. And I share this with adults, and I'm saying, when you talk to your significant other, you're way more likely to share your experiences and ideas if you know that person is trusting you. If you believe that we're in an environment where I can say what I believe without being ridiculed or put down or judged. So that was our first component. And I said, oh yeah, that's pretty good. But that was me when I was at the university, because it's the 40,000 foot level. Oh yeah, just share thoughts and ideas underpinned by trust and respect. Then we got some pushback, and rightfully so. The pushback was, no, that's just going to create a lot of chatter. And I'm like, you're right. So the second component, after they share their thoughts and ideas, the second component is offering realistic suggestions for the good of the whole. Now look at that definition. That definition is different. It's not just one-way communication of me asking, or complaining. I am now sharing my thoughts and ideas for the good of the whole. That's an interesting concept, because we don't usually think for the good of the whole in these days. It's about me. We're in this me generation. AI is about personalizing everything to you. Rarely is AI talking about personalizing you to others. Everything is about me, 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 me. And I think Burger King started this. They started by having your burger their way or your way. And I think the whole world got upended after that. So what I'm suggesting is we got to change the narrative. It's like, I want to hear your thoughts and ideas, but I want to hear them how they're for the good of the whole, right? And I want realistic suggestions. I hear people all the time saying, think outside the box. I want you to think outside the box. I tell people all the time, here's the reality. You work in a box. Schools are a box. Now, if you need to think outside that box, go ahead. But know those ideas that you're getting outside the box need to get brought back into your box. I go, bedazzle your box, make it bigger, make it prettier. I don't care what you do, but stop saying I need to think outside the box like there was a miracle cure out there. I go, you can think out there, but just know you work in a box. So bring something back that's realistic. All right. So now I've got sharing thoughts and ideas, offering realistic suggestions for the good of the whole. That's pretty powerful, but I was still missing the piece. And this is where the agency piece comes in for me. But I wrap it into the way we define voice. The third component of our voice definition is accepting responsibility for not only what I'm saying, but what needs to happen next. That's the agency piece. Now I own it. So I'm sharing my thoughts and ideas because I'm in an environment underpinned by trust and respect. I'm offering realistic suggestions for the good of the whole. And third, and just as important as the other two components, I'm now accepting responsibility for what needs to be done. Now all of a sudden I'm looking at voice and it's like, amen, I want more voice. Because if we all, just to your point, if we all had that common definition, it is an easy thing to support. It's not saying, oh, just tell me what you think, or we're going to have a seminar on voice and everyone's going to air their grievances. No, then it becomes an event. To me, voice is a process. It's not an event. It's not going to happen because some principal says, oh, this is what we need to work on. Or some teacher says, I'm going to give my students voice, like that's theirs to give. It's going to happen when we have a common understanding. And that common understanding, which really works, is that preschoolers understand it. This isn't like rocket science out there. This is common. I was going to say this. I don't want to say this in a bad way. I was going to say preschoolers understand it and parents even understand it. That's the real killer. Because as a former principal, and I know you're going to have principals in your audience, as a former principal, my biggest lie, because I was a principal back in the day, my biggest lie is when I said to the principals, to the parents during my first meeting with the families, I would always say, it is so good to see you all here. Okay, that was lie number one, because it really wasn't. I was like, they scared the hell out of me. Then my second lie is I would say to them, come by my office anytime. I have an open door policy. I want to hear from you. That was even more of a lie because I did not want to hear from them. And then I said the third biggest lie was, if you see me in the store, stop me. Just pull over. If I'm eating at a restaurant, come in, join me. I want to hear what you think. Well, the reason I had trouble saying that now is because I didn't mean it then, because we didn't have a definition of voice. A parent voice was a complaining one. Like, you need to fix this, Dr. Q. You need to do this. My son Johnny is not being treated. Like I was in fix-it mode. But if I had this definition of voice from my parents, amen, I would be begging them to come to my office, share realistic suggestions for the good of the whole, and take responsibility for what needs to happen next. So this notion of voice, I know that was probably the longest explanation ever. But that notion of the definition of voice is critical for us because we can't start with everybody all over the place, how they're defining voice. Because I understand why teachers don't want students to have voice. And I understand why students don't want teachers to have more voice, because we don't understand what it really means. And there's a big difference between voice and noise. And we're promoting this notion of voice. Everything else out there that doesn't think for the good of the whole, not offering realistic suggestions or accepting responsibility, to me, that's noise. That's just noise.
Yeah. I'm so kind of hearing that, and I love Russ's energy when he speaks. But it for me, I'm really keen to probably hear from you on this as a teacher and a principal who is very guilty of loving the concept of being able to give ideas and then someone else doing the work. And I've been guilty of that many times. I'm interested to know from your work in Australian schools, why is having a clear definition of voice important from your perspective?
Yeah, Justin, it's really interesting because I think when I first started, the work, I wanted students to have a voice. I wanted students to have that responsibility and be empowered, and have that confidence. But without that definition of actually understanding what it means to be me, how can I contribute? How can I authentically work with you? I think there's a big gap. What we want for our students, but what we're actually getting is misunderstood. So this common definition starts to bring people together to say, we value you as an individual. You are unique. You have your own voice, which no one else has. And you can contribute. You can actually be a valued member of this community to not only share your ideas, but you're creating the trust and respect, because each contribution you make is unique, and we want to hear that. And then we move from your uniqueness to we together. So we're inviting you to be part of the solution, but we together can come up with solutions. So let's hear your ideas, your solutions, and then how can we work together? We all take responsibility to move forward. So it's not what you're going to do or what I'm going to do, it's what we're going to do together. And what I see in schools, for example, is when we first start working with students and ask for their opinions, they're very good, as Russ said, at telling everybody else what they need to do. In fact, just this last week, I did hear from one student who said, no, really, the students are fine. It's the teachers who need to do something. So what we need to do is recognize, actually, no, we are all responsible together. And this shared definition really helps us come back to talk about what is our responsibility? What is our role in this? What is my voice? What is it that I can contribute to be part of what we're trying to do together? So I think without that shared, I'd go past definition and say shared understanding of what it means to have a voice. A lot of people still think it is share your thoughts and then I'm still going to do my thing. So many people stop at that point. As I say, there's a difference between being consulted and collaborating with people. It's not about just consulting and then ignoring. It's actually genuinely seeking your voice and then seeing you as a valued person. I'm going to give you responsibility to, work with me. And I think that makes such a difference to students when you see them as not complying, but actually contributing. Actually, what am I able to do? What is my skill set? What is my unique contribution? And I think with that, and I think one of the things maybe Russ didn't quite mention is to point out it's a definition of voice. It's not a definition of student voice. We use this definition to apply to teachers, to apply to parents, to apply to students, that it's about you and your voice, your contribution, and how you can accept responsibility to work with us to move forward.
Yeah. I love that, because I'm a firm believer in it's easier to teach something if we are active in it ourselves, right? So
Absolutely.
I love the fact that we have the same definition for us as we do for students. I think that helps in the process, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the key things when working in schools, I really talk with teachers about unpacking the roles and responsibility. What is my role in this? What is your role in this? And really that shared responsibility, and what does that mean? But of course, it needs to start. We have a framework that we use with schools, and we need to, first of all, really help students understand that we want to listen. We really want to listen to their ideas, because they're so used to being the passive recipients. No, do as you're told. In fact, the work I used to do, we used to ask students what it meant to be an effective learner, and they always said, listen to the teacher, that they thought that was going to help them learn. But in fact, no, you as a learner need to actually use your voice. You need to know how and when to use your voice. You need to have the skills, the capabilities to be you, and you contribute and you accept responsibility.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Over to you, Chris, for the next section.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Sue and Justin. And we're going to move back to hear from Russ again for the next set of questions that we asked Russ. And really, this is about the impact. What is the impact of student voice, and when every student genuinely feels that their voice is being heard? And it's that taking responsibility and hearing the suggestions, and taking responsibility for what happens next. But what's the impact on things like self-worth and engagement and purpose?
So we've got that voice definition. Then we have what drives what we believe are three guiding principles of self-worth, engagement, and purpose. Within those guiding principles, there's all sorts of other variables. For example, you can't have self-worth unless there is a sense of belonging. I can't feel good about myself if I don't feel like I belong in the community. Now, here's the catch that when we talk about belonging is not just feeling a part of the community. It's not just wearing the same colored jackets or going to the same, cheering on the same teams. That's all fine and dandy. But a real sense of belonging is I feel like I'm a part of the community, but I can be myself. That's the difference. Because this notion of belonging is relatively easy to do. Gangs do it all the time. Cult leaders do it all the time. But in school, we want more than that. I don't want you just to feel like you belong. I want to celebrate who you are. I want to recognize your diversity and celebrate it as a group. So when I hear people talk about belonging or self-worth, I'm like, well, the first thing we need to do is have these students feel like they belong, like they matter. Individually, they matter, and collectively, they matter. The other piece is around self-worth. The students need heroes. They need someone that they can look up to, not just the superstar athletes or the people you see now in the Olympics. Those aren't bad role models, but I need real people. I need people like I can pick up the phone. It's like if I'm having a bad day, I'm not picking up the phone and say, oh, Simone Biles. Yeah, I know you're a superstar. Could you help me? I've got this little thing no, that's not happening. Maybe it will. Maybe she's that special person. I don't know. But chances are it's not happening. I want to know the brothers, the sisters, the aunts, the uncles, the older students, the younger students, the teacher, the janitor, the cafeteria worker, the administration that's in the front office, the principal, the assistant principal, the guidance counselor, the art teachers, theater. These are the heroes, whether they know it or not. And some teachers say, well, I don't really want to be a hero. And I just tell them that's not even your choice. Your only choice is if you're a good one or a bad one. The students will decide if you're the hero or not. So I talk to people all the time, like, that's not me. I'm like, well, it might not be you, but some students might think it's you. So you need to rise to the occasion. And then the last component, particularly around self-worth, because I know this notion of taking care of ourselves, self-awareness is important, is having a sense of accomplishment. We are driven by grades, and I get that. I mean, we're not sending our students to school to be dumber. I 100% understand that. But I also want my students to be recognized for effort, for perseverance, for citizenship. We talk about that like it's important because I believe it is, and it's in mission statements, but rarely do we practice it in schools, and that becomes problematic. I get the importance of grades, but I also believe the importance of citizenship and perseverance. My point is about engagement. Oh my God, it's like everybody's an engagement expert. And I tell people all the time, no, engagement's relatively simple. Let people have a voice, and you know what? They're going to be engaged. Oh, you're going to tell me what you think about what we're learning. Shocker, I might be more engaged. You're going to share your voice with me. Oh, I might even learn some of your interests. Shocker, you might be more engaged. I'm gonna test your fun and excitement ability, because that's how we look at engagement. What's fun and exciting? I can't know what excites you until I talk to you. Again, a shocker. The notion of communicating opens up these doors to engagement like nothing else. Like the data, when students believe they have a voice, when they believe they're being listened to and learned from, they're 38% more likely to be engaged in their learning. I don't care how many books you read, you're not going to get that kind of data results. And again, I go back to common sense. Now, I want to be super clear about this. Common sense does not translate to common practice. I get there are two distinct things. Like, we do things in school that make absolutely no flipping sense to anyone, but you know what? We still do it. So I tell people all the time, what makes sense and what doesn't? How about going back to some common sense? And common sense tells me if I know my students, the better I know my students, the better I can gauge my teaching to their needs. And I'm not just talking academic needs, I'm talking about motivational needs. If I'm teaching mathematics and I have a jazz player, a jazz guitarist in my class, well, you know what? I'm taking those notes he or she is learning, and I'm going to put some some mathematics spin on it. If I have someone that's so engaged in geography, during my English classes, you can make damn sure I'm going to be having them writing papers on some kind of geography thing that's going on. If I've got someone in my class that is an environmentalist, I don't care what subject matter I'm teaching, I'm going to hone in on that and say, from your perspective as an environmentalist, how does that impact what we're learning in math? How does it impact what we're learning in English? What are you learning in my social studies class that's going to help you round out, be a better environmentalist? Now, that person grow up to be an environmentalist, I don't know. But what I do know is in time and space that they're going to be recognized for something that they're interested in. But even if you've got classes of 30 or 40 or 25 for that matter, you've got to be so purposeful understanding who your students are. It's easy to write it off as a professor because it's like, oh, there are big lecture halls. But there's no excuse to write it off when you're teaching primary, elementary school, middle school. There's just no reason we can't know our 100+ kids incredibly well. I mean, there's no excuse. And the same thing, there's no excuse they should know who you are as a person as well. I'm always amazed. The teachers that are most engaging with their students, they not only know the students, but the students know them. They know what excites them. They know what pisses them off. They know what buttons to push, and they know which buttons not to push. And I tell the staff all the time, particularly administrators, I say, your staff knows how to engage you, don't they? Because they know what buttons to push. Now you need to figure out what the positive buttons are to push. But yeah, it just makes sense. The more conversations we have, the greater it is for engagement. And then last but not least, purpose, which Sue's shaking her head because the last since COVID, as a matter of fact, I've been hell-bent writing about purpose. When COVID came and all the schools are kind of upside down, and I said, you know what? I know we think this is the tough times. These are not the tough times. The tough times are going to be post-COVID, after the students get a taste of what it means to be independent, and I don't have to come in every day and jump from class to class. Like, I'm going to be learning asynchronously. I'll be in control of my learning. I'm going to take more responsibility. It's going to be tough getting those kids back in to get socialized again. I also thought it was true about the teachers. I think it's tough for teachers to come back from COVID. I've got teachers in metropolitan districts here in the United States that loved teaching during COVID because they had no discipline issues because everything was online. They had nobody touching each other because everything was online. They had no traffic because all they had to do is deal with the traffic going from the second floor bedroom to the first floor office. So it was like, wow, this is pretty good. Now I've got to get re-socialized and see what's going on. And I see us losing students now. I see us losing teachers now because I believe they've lost their sense of purpose. They've got to revisit, what are my values? What are my passions? What are my goals? What are my skills? And what voice allows us to do, it allows us to verbalize what our values really are. It allows us to share, what am I passionate about? It allows me to come up with goals and my aspirations of what I'm going to do next. And then ultimately, through conversations, I can figure out, after I understand my values and I understand my passions and my aspirations, I can talk about what skills do I need. Because that is a piece we forget about purpose. Purpose is more than understanding who you are. Understand is who you are and what you're going to do about it. That's purpose. God, I love, that's such a great question. So, Justin, my experience is the students that are the most unheard are the ones that we don't align with. It is easy to hear the voices of students that we align with. It is so hard to track someone down that we know we're going to get critiqued. Like, it's like, why I introduced this new idea. I think I'm going to run it by my staff because I am 100% sure they're going to be 100% supportive, which is great for your ego, but doesn't do much advancing my understanding of what I'm working on. So it takes effort and time to go after people that we don't hear from often. Silence is not golden. I say this to administrators all the time. As a former administrator, I would think if my staff didn't have questions, I'd be like, whoo-hoo, woo, I was crystal clear. They are loving me. Instead, what it was is they were talking to their steering wheel, driving home like, what the hell is Russ talking about today? What the, so silence, I tell teachers all the time, is not golden. If you have a quiet staff meeting and ask for input, no one has any, here's the rule of thumb. You're screwed. So, I just say, I go like, no, force them to ask questions. You've got to figure out what's going on. The other thing, Justin, is important too about voice, that we're slow to on this one at our end. And I don't feel good about this, but this is our weakness. Students with special needs, we got to be purposeful about going after them. Not, they could be on the exact same page where we are. They could be incredibly affirming to what we're doing, but we can't take anything for granted. The other thing that I share with people is, and I know this is going to sound somewhat odd, but listen with your eyes. I tell people all the time, listen with your eyes. I say, well, these students aren't very verbal. I'm like, well, you know what? When their head's on the desk like this, I don't need to do a survey on engagement. They're not engaged. So, look with your eyes, because your eyes will tell you a whole lot about what you can hear. If I see a student sitting by themselves in the cafeteria, I see students being mean to each other, I don't need a survey. I don't need a focus group. I'm seeing with my eyes. I'm listening with my eyes. And I think that becomes critically important. The other barrier when it comes to certain students, and I'm not saying all students, but certain students, this is going to sound horrible. I don't even know how to say this nicely. But being an American, I guess I don't have to say anything nicely. They don't know how to use their voice. They just don't. I tell students, I tell this to teachers too, don't judge me. Don't let me judge what you're saying by how you say it, right? I think we spend so much time trying, which is good, trying to have a definition of voice that we understand, can appreciate, and operationalize. But then we just can't assume that voice just happens. It's not a natural way of being. Like, we got to teach young people when to use their voice, how to use their voice, what to use their voice about, and where to use their voice. I mean, it's pretty basic. And we got staff that goes out there and works with students. And when I see them work with students, I'm like saying, yep, that's exactly what we need to do. But then I also realize that's exactly what we need to do with staff. Have you ever gone to a staff meeting and see how they communicate with each other in a faculty room? People leave angry, they leave upset. We talk about students having cliques. Oh my God. We're like teachers, we're the click masters. We're the master clickers. Oh, that could be a new book. I'm gonna write that down, actually, master. So the notion is, not having a voice just creates these pockets. It creates these pockets where I do have cliques in the staff, where I don't understand how to share what I'm saying without hurting somebody's feelings. And it's accepting what I'm hearing. The other component of voice is about listen, learn, and lead. The very best people that use their voice know how to listen, right? And then they're also willing to learn. And then they're really willing to lead with each other. So if you look at the definition of voice and then compound that with listen, learn, and lead, you've got a winning combination. But again, it doesn't happen with a workshop. It takes time. I'm thinking of the schools we're working with. We're looking at 3 years. And I know that sounds like a lot, but when you spread it out over time, and I always find this funny. Oh my God, you've been working there for 3 years? I go, yeah, we've been working in the school for 3 years. We go 5 times a year for 2 hours. That's 10 hours. That's 30 hours in 3 years. And you're happy that you have voice. I'm like, it's a miracle we have anything that happens in schools when you look at the way we do professional development. Because they're always saying, God, things are so slow. I go, you just spent 10 hours a year on this. Cut it out. That's like teaching algebra class for a week and wondering why your kids aren't in calculus. It's like, seriously, dude, you've taught me for 10 hours. The same thing is true with professional development. We think it's a pill. Take the PD pill. You'll be fine. Take the pill, call me in the morning, tell you what you need.
Justin, I just love how he is so enthusiastic, but he summarizes so much gold in there about self-worth, engagement, purpose. And certainly when I talk with students, it's amazing that a lot of absolutely no sense of purpose. They're not sure where they're going, who they are. And I'm just thinking of one high school student who said recently, I just want to be seen as a human being, see me as a person, kind of thing. So I think you know, when we talk about the impact on, as I say, the self-worth, who am I and how am I accomplishing things, as he says, a sense of accomplishment, then we become more engaged that we're doing that. And then I can actually be confident, and through my values, through the skills, through my aspirations, that sense of purpose. So you've spent 10 years, Justin, working with disengaged students, and students, they, if you ask them, they probably would say, no, I don't have a voice, no one listens to me. What has that experience taught you, Justin, about that?
Yeah, it's interesting, Sue. So one of the things I think of is quite often, you know, for our young people, it's a really conscious effort to try to capture voice, but a lot of times they've got lots of adults involved with them. So when we ask the question, this includes teachers, etc., and ask, what is the student's voice? It's interesting because quite often they come back to me with what I would call kind of the art of questioning, right? Well, we question in this way or at this time or whatever it might be. And I think it's the wrong starting point, right? Because we're actually talking about the art of listening just to start with. Yeah. And I'm not asking, you know, how many times did you ask a question? I'm actually asking, what have you heard from that young person? And I think Russ is right. One of the things that's difficult, especially for young people who might be disengaged or unheard, is quite often that they don't align with us. Yeah. And what they say and how they say it, for example, in their behavior, for example, is something that we find really, really challenging. And that means we can dismiss the voice when it happens, right? Because they didn't say it how we wanted them to say it, we write it off. Or even worse, we tell them not to have a voice because we say, don't do that to them. And, you know, these are, if I think about, you know, I've worked with a lot of young people who've experienced complex trauma, who have had probably throughout their development, so many times they've been told they're not worth anything. And they don't have the same affirmation. They don't have the same praise that a lot of us, for example, other students may have had, right? They've already come to us with this low self-worth. And then without even thinking about it, we continue to tell them through our actions we're not meaning it. We keep telling them that they don't have that. And if they don't have that, you know, we can do all the best planning in the world. We can provide a safe environment, but they're not going to share their voice because they're like, what does it matter? Who cares about my voice? So I often think the starting point for those young people, and you know, I think that's true of many vulnerable and marginalized students, that's true of, is we can flip that question and just say, firstly, hey, do you actually value this child or this young person? But moving past that, do we actually like them? Because if you don't like them, how are we ever going to, and especially if they're coming from further back with self-worth, how are we going to ever show them that they have this worth? And people might go, but that's a lot of hard work, right? Which it totally is a lot of hard work. We need to go the extra effort with those young people. Kind of, why is that important? Well, I think we would all agree we want our schools to be as safe, engaged as well as possible. We do that with that cohort. Because if we continue to do it with the cohort who readily have a voice, they've learnt the rules, they've learnt what we want, right? Yes, we progress them, but as a community, we're just widening that gap between those two groups of students. What we want to do is bring those students up, and that's why it's worth the extra work we've got to put in.
I love that, Justin. I love how, I mean, I'd even say, is it extra work or is it core work? As someone once said, it's not more work, it's our core work. And I think that really goes back to, what is our purpose? In this situation, what is it that you're actually trying to achieve? And it's interesting, when I speak with teachers, I want them empowered, I want them confident, I want them to be independent, I want them to be themselves. They come out with all these espoused values, and yet what we do day in, day out is try to funnel them, as you say, to align with the language of school, the language of how it is. I had the experience just this week it was student voice. I'm asking the student for their ideas, and the child burst into tears because she didn't know the right answer. I don't know what the right answer is. And it's like, there isn't a right answer because it's your idea. But she's in year 3 and had already learned, I have to give right answers. And it's kind of like, what are we teaching our students in school if we're closing down, as you say? No, we need you to align with this. So I think absolutely what you're saying is, what we're saying with one hand and then what we do is different. So we really have to engage with the students where they are, who they are. And I think the point I wanted to do also point out, when you asked about asking questions, it's interesting, Australian data is telling us our students are afraid to ask questions. They're afraid to say they don't know. They're afraid to be seen to, not have that high ability, because that's what we seem to value in our schools. So we really need to change the conversation and look, what do we value? What are those characteristics of decent human beings? That's what we want to talk about and develop in our students.
Absolutely. And you made me think, around that, is it harder work? Well, it's not, because we all get into this vocation because we want to do the best by children and young people. And most of the time, whether it's friends or educators I work with, etc., and if I ask them the question, what is a great story, success story you've had? They go to these young people who don't have a voice, and then they talk about this great journey and this great effort, and then it led to success. And they're the things they hold, that give them hope throughout your career. Like, these are really powerful things. It's what fills our soul.
Yeah, and I love, as you say, success, because maybe we need to broaden our definition of success. And I think if we are instilling hope, aspirations, confidence in our students, that they have that efficacy, they have that ability to guide their own future, to make choices that are going to bring them joy and fulfillment, then that's what we're really talking about. So absolutely, how do we bring that back to actually go, what are we aspiring for in school? What is our purpose? What are our values? And how about we co-create with students a vision of, this is how we're going to get there, and you actually work together day in, day out, going, are we living those values? Are we enacting what we really want together? I think that would be success, is that when people go, yeah, I was part of that journey and I've come out feeling hopeful. I think that would be great.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sue and Justin. And we might move now to basically the last piece with Russ, which is very much the kind of the key takeaways and the key messages from the conversation so far, and especially around, some of those unheard voices as well.
Yeah, so we ask this question of children and young people when they come into the school, and that is, who's your favourite teacher? And pretty much every time they have one. And each time when they talk about why, they talk about, because that teacher went above and beyond, out of their way to get to know me. And interestingly, we quite often hear in schools, or my experience in schools as well, has been, we can often talk about that one class that student or young person is doing well in, like it's a miracle, like it's just happened. And it's just luck of the draw, and they do well there. It must be because they like the subject and they don't like others. But actually what we find all the time is students, quite often, they're not just giving the subjects they love. They're actually giving the adults who really they had a connection with.
100. It's like real estate. When they say real estate is about location, 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 teaching is about relationships, relationships, relationships. Hey, Justin, you know what? I ask students, it's interesting, and you something to try. Instead of going to the teacher, like, who's your favorite teacher? I would say, who's your favorite person, personally, and tell me why. Because then it has them think a little bit differently. And then we say, are there characteristics that I can learn from as a teacher from this? Because all of a sudden I've taken the teacher baggage away. But I want to know, who do you like spending time with? That's another way to ask. I always try to ask it, kind of get around it a little bit. So because there's some pat answers. Who's your favorite teacher? What do you want this teacher to? I would want to go like, who do you like to hang around with? Why do you like to hang around these kind of people? And then all of a sudden you can start deducing like, oh yeah, that sounds like Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so, because they'll have lunch with you in the cafeteria, something like that. I always try to, when it comes to the student voice, I try to be as leading and non-direct as I can be. Does that make sense? Like I want to hear what they think, but I want to make sure I'm understanding why they're saying what they're saying. I don't want them to say things that I want them to hear. We do a lot of work in England, and we survey students and do focus groups all the time. And I love them, but they're the most compliant students on the planet. Like I would ask them a question and they're saying what I think they want everyone to hear them say. And I would literally, Justin and Chris, I would look at them in the eye, I'm like, you don't mean that. Well, no, I do. I'm like, do you really? And they're like this. No. And I'm like, all right, well, tell me what you think. I don't need to know what adults think. I want to know what you think, your student voice. And there's something special about student voice. See the word? It's student. It's your voice. I don't want student voice mimicking adult voice. I don't need that because I have adults there I can talk to. I want to know what excites you. I want to know what your values are. I want to know who you want to hang around with. I want to know what I can do to help you be a successful student. And then I want you to know, because I'm going to be ready to answer this for the students. And this is important for everybody that's going to be listening to this about voice. You need to share your voice with students, what you expect from them as well. This isn't a one-way street. It isn't, because our expectations of students now are crashingly low, in my opinion. I think this is absolutely true with disadvantaged students, and we work in some inner city schools. And the very first thing I urge my staff to do is raise expectations. They're going to raise expectations. They're so used to flying under the radar because the radar is so pathetically non-compliant to anything. I'm like, no, let's raise the stakes. Let's raise the expectations. If we're going to have celebratory things, let's celebrate something worth celebrating. The point here is we've got to celebrate what's worth celebrating. And one thing to celebrate is to ask the students what they should be celebrating. Like, what gives you recognition? What would make you happy that I recognize you for something? What are you good at? And I would do this with an interview, particularly when you talk about that, the referral meeting or interview. I would be so upfront and say, listen, you're here for a reason. A lot of people don't think you're good at anything. What are you good at? I need to give me something. Like, what makes you shine? I don't care if somebody else is like, what makes you shine personally? What are you passionate about? What do you want to get up like it's Christmas in the morning? Like, what is it? Just help me understand what it is, because that's the only way I can help you move forward. And how does this tie into voice? It's all about voice. We can't do this silently. We can't read minds yet, thank Lord. But it's all about voice. It's being willing to listen, be willing to learn, and then lead with our students.
Like there's so many good things in there. I mean, just that last kind of comment around the, what are they good at and finding what they're good at, like makes me think of so many times when I was a younger teacher where I would give students praise and they didn't react the way I expected. And then I realized afterwards it's because they didn't place value on the thing that I was giving them praise for. They didn't see it as something that was deserving of praise, or it wasn't something that, so it links so beautifully with all the kind of points you've already made around purpose and value and goals and aspirations. But, we need to hear what those are like, and we need to hear them. And
Yep.
yeah, if you could sum up some key messages, because I think there's just so much gold in this already. But if you could sum up some key messages for our schools, what would they be?
I guess the first one would be that voice is not easy. It's seemingly easy. And I see I see schools, I see actually states for that matter, that say, we're doing voice, we do a survey. Our students feel valued because we meet with them, or the principal will have lunch with them, once a week, maybe once a month. And I'm like, no, that's not it. It's gonna be like the air we breathe. Student voice needs to be a natural way of being, and it's not that yet. So I think for the schools is to be purposeful about it. I don't think having a period called student voice is helpful. I don't think having a student group called the student voice group is helpful. I think it's just going to be a natural way of being where it becomes the air we breathe. we've been in a district in California actually for, I want to say 8 years, and we shouldn't be there that long, but they just want us there because we just keep on enriching what they're doing. But what's really fascinating about this, we'll send people over there to visit that school. It's Woodside, California. We'll send people there to see the school, and now they wonder why. And I'm like, because you're like the model voice school, and they're like, I don't see it anymore. And I'm like, that's the beauty. You don't see this because this is who you are. It's a way of being. It's not. There's no fanfare. There's no giant posters anywhere. It's like this is how we roll. This is how we roll. It doesn't slow them up. And this is in the most challenging places on the planet. They were just, and I hate this term, but they were past at risk. They're literally on the way out. And they just need to, so that somebody, Justin, to your point, shows that they cared, had a trusting relationship with them, respected who they were, and valued. That doesn't mean they get their way. And this is the other important thing that I would leave schools with. Students having voice is not them getting their way. That's just called being spoiled. Students believe they have a voice when they believe they're listened to and learn from. It doesn't have to be their way. It just has to, they need to believe that they will listen to and learn from. And then all of a sudden, the rest is gravy. And so, the thing about moving forward, I guess, is I would challenge schools to continually reflect on their purpose, and renew their passions about who they are, why they became an educator. To me, that's really important. And by having that understanding, the voice piece just comes to the top. There's nothing magic about it. It takes hard work though. And it's got to be purposeful because it's not a natural way of being yet. Our students aren't used to having their voices heard, learned from, or valued. Some teachers aren't either. So this is usually hard work, incredibly purposeful. And the best way to do it is being honest and open and create this environment of trust and respect. And the rest will come. It's going to take time, but the rest will come. I've seen it happen over and over 44 decades plus, of the most challenging places. It's this belief. And I tell teachers all the time, you've got to believe that wonderful surprises are just waiting to happen. And all the hopes and dreams we have for ourselves and all the hopes and dreams we have for our students, they're all within our reach. This isn't a magic potion out there. All these hopes and dreams are well within our reach. We just need to be purposeful and go after it. And Chris, to your point, it's about being present. And I can't be present as an educator if I'm not sure of my own purpose. And I think that's a challenge we have with a lot of educators now. And I've dealt with it myself. There are times I'm wondering, like, why am I getting on a plane again? Until I'm there, it's like, oh, this is my purpose. It's like this gives me hope, and it just refuels me again. And I think it's critical, but we got to take time to do that. And again, purpose is a pretty complicated entity out there, but we all have it. And the other good thing about purpose, it's a renewable energy. It's an absolute renewable energy.
Absolutely, Sue. I'm really keen to hear from you, and with I guess a little bit of a practical lens from your experience in supporting schools in this area in Australia. How do you reach unheard voices in a school?
With intention. I think one of the key things is it is a way of being, as Russ says, but it's a way of thinking of, do I really want to partner with the students that are in front of me? And it really is about understanding that currently there is always a power imbalance in schools. It's us and them, the students and the teachers. And I think one of the key things is to look at your intention, the purpose, you as an educator, and then think, is what I'm doing every single day getting me closer, getting each student closer to who they're meant to be? Am I developing them as a human being, not a number on a piece of paper? Or am I doing it for every student? Because as Russ said, people say, oh, we have the survey, we have the student voice. So it needs to be something that's embedded in everyday work, that you're partnering with students. And one of the ways of doing that in schools is a lot more co-creation with students. I work in a lot of schools and they say, oh yes, we did that at the beginning of the year. We co-created our class rules. And it's like, no, every day you put the list on the wall, but you're not living it. It was just, it's about living those values, not just laminating a poster and putting it on the wall. So it's about looking at your planning and going, where are the opportunities for student voice, and how am I making sure they know what their role is in this? So if I have learning intentions, I have success criteria, you know, where am I inviting the students to tell me what they understand about the learning intention? What's their prior knowledge, which again is activating their thinking. If I'm creating success criteria, how about I use examples and I ask the students, what do you see in these examples that make them good examples? So you're inviting the students on a day-to-day basis to work with you. So I think it's really important that it isn't, as Russ said, it's not a separate lesson, but it's that partnership that really is living it. So understanding the roles, you know, I'm a teacher, I'm here, that I'm helping you develop your role as a learner. How are you contributing? What is it that you're doing? And really helping them recognize that together you are trying to help them be the best that they can be. So, you know, how do we celebrate the progression as a human being and developing those skills and capabilities? So valuing each, I was going to use the word goal, but it's each milestone that each individual student is making. How are you actually going? That's fantastic that you now turn up to school every day. You know, when last year, remember, you were only coming, you know, once a month or something. It's really seeing through the eyes of the student and then working with them to celebrate the fact that they're growing, they're progressing as an individual. And being interested in them as a person, not as a group of students, but the individual, as Russ said, seeking out. So I think it's about developing, looking at capabilities. And ironically, I say to schools all the time, you do know that's actually already in the curriculum. This is not in addition. Those capabilities, the personal social capability, the critical thinking, you know, building those opportunities in to say that the work we're doing here together is about you and me working together, living those values, developing, we as a community are here for this purpose. So very much deliberate, intentional, and the way we think about what our job is, it isn't about high grade. We have high expectations for that individual to grow into the best version of themselves. It's not about that person getting an A, because I was never an A student. And does that mean I'm less valued in society because, you know, I got C's, I got D's, I got B's? You know, no, we should be actually flipping that and going, who are you and how are you contributing to this world? And really looking at broadening that definition of success, co-creating the vision together with the students to go, how will we be each day? How are we going to work together to achieve that vision? And reflecting together, is what we're doing working for us as we are? What can we do differently? So I think it's certainly in intentionality, co-creation, listening, and then learning from each other. What do we need to do to move forward together?
Yeah, and you've touched on beautifully some of those kind of co-design opportunities, etc., and in the classroom. I must admit, sometimes, and then thinking about these unheard voices, and obviously thinking about young people who can really find it difficult to communicate. I must admit, some of the best co-design I've done is when I'm shooting a basketball.
Yeah.
With a child or young person, right?
Yeah.
Before school, they've shown up early, shooting the basketball, and just taken these opportunities so that they're in different contexts. They have opportunities and we have opportunities to co-design together. And it makes me think too, around when Russ was talking about how important it is that we just kind of, you know, at some point we live it, is I think you can only fully take advantage of those opportunities if all the adults are doing that intentionally. So how many times would there be an opportunity like that? Take this shooting the basketball for an example, where the student can actually really participate well, we can hear them well and go through that process, but we don't take it. because we don't even think to take it at that time. So I think, you know, how important it is for teachers, but also education support staff, or you know, in our case, we like to give the understanding to every adult in the school environment. So any adult can take that opportunity when it comes.
It's interesting you say that, just as you're making me think, how many times have people, you know, you're walking down a corridor, you're walking past a student, how about say, hi, how are you going? You know, how was the game at the weekend or whatever, and connecting with them as a person. Because a lot of what we talk about is this is what happens in the classroom. And yet a lot of the issues that students are having are outside the classroom when it's their real world and they're interacting with their peers, with others. Again, recent data survey, respect is huge. The data is telling us student to student respect is at an all-time low, and it's just getting worse. So how are they interacting with each other, and how are we modeling what that day-to-day interaction actually looks like, and actually caring about you as a person, as a human being, and having those conversations and checking in? So grabbing those opportunities to just connect with them as people, not just students, and celebrating the small wins, the small gains that each student is making, you know. And I think it really goes to the heart of, you know, how are people connecting together, rather than actually it's at school and this is how we do school and this is what you must do. I think it really is, we're a community that happens to be learning how to be the best that we are. So it's like, you know, how are we celebrating that learning journey together?
Do you think that in a school that's doing voice well, that a key part of that too is then us as educators sharing that student voice more broadly and with other educators?
Yeah, absolutely. Just I think that's the interesting thing. And you know, as Russ said, they kind of go, why? What are we doing? But it's I heard one principal talk recently at school in Victoria, and he said whatever decisions they're making, they now say, what do the students think about this? And then he laughs and he's like, it's funny that I'm actually having to say that now we do that, whereas before we didn't. So it really is recognizing, hang on, there's the majority of people in our schools are the students. You know, there's more of them than there are of the adults. It's this huge potential of, you know, helping us do what we say our purpose is, and yet we're having the adults make all these decisions. So it's like, hang on, why don't we invite this huge potential to partner with us, and then celebrate our schools are developing the best human beings that they can be. We're developing the characteristics, and the students want to tell you how they do that. So one of the things we did recently, for example, was ask a school, can you create a video for us of your students talking about what it means to have student voice? It's such an inspiring video. I love one of the students at the end, and he says, you know, it's my voice, I was born with it. You know, a prep kid says, you know, we use voice every day, it's in everything you do. They really understand because they're living it. And in that same video, a student, you know, I'm not a survey, a token, or an add-on. Like, yeah, it's like, it's me. You're talking about me, not a thing that we do, as Russ said. So I think hearing the voice, and when educators actually hear students talking about what they do well, what their hopes and dreams are, why they are so well valued in a school that's really inviting that with them, that gives energy to educators. That's yes, that's what I want. I want my kids to talk like that. And I think the more we can share that with each other and celebrate the voice of students, the more inspiring it is for educators, the more people get back to their moral purpose of, why did I get into this? And particularly, my background's with, you know, students who struggle. I was someone who, I probably still do struggle to go, have I really got a voice? Do you really want to hear what I think? So I think I really resonate with those kids who think they haven't got a voice. And when you see them transformed, when they recognize I do have a voice, and people are ready to listen, and I can actually share who I am genuinely and contribute and be valued and heard, it just, lights up the room, and you kind of go, you take on the world now that you've got that confidence. And that's what we really want to see in all our students.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, are we going to go to some questions now, Chris? Yeah.
Absolutely. So we're going to enter that Q&A part. And so if you have a question, please pop it in the Q&A section. If you don't have access to that or can't see it on your phone or anything, please stick it in the chat box instead. There's a couple of questions there already. I've also been kind of messaging some people as well, and I've got a couple of questions. I think maybe a good one to start on, given the context of schooling around the world at the moment, and Russ touched on it, but Sue, you've also just touched on it there as well. And I think keen probably to hear from both of you on this, but given some of the current challenges in schools and how stretched some schools are for staff, and how they're struggling with mental health and well-being for both students and staff, given those circumstances that many schools are finding themselves in, what do you say to a school or staff within a school who say, there's too much other stuff going on right now for us to invest in this? I'm already at capacity. I'm already overloaded. We don't even have enough staff. We don't have time. We just can't do this. What would be a response to that? Sue, maybe I'll start with you.
I think I'd say, do you want to come away each day feeling that you've done a good job? Do you want that feeling of well-being yourself, that I, as a teacher, have empowered my students? I've helped them have their confidence. I think, again, it goes back to what's your purpose? And instead of seeing it as an add-on, it's actually, it's a catalyst, it's an activator. By actually sharing the responsibility with students for their learning, developing their learner capability, you actually sort of hand over some of that stress, and that, because it's actually, no, you are a capable learner. I'm going to teach you how, rather than focusing purely 100% on what I'm teaching. How about we look at teaching and learning and help the students actually be an active role in this learning? You are a learner. These are the capabilities. This is what learners do. So you're handing over to the students, and then also student to student. There's so much that can happen in classes that students can support each other if they're supported by teachers. They're using the success criteria. It's not a free-for-all, but it's actually helping you as the educator share your voice through the voices of students, that they will actually help with the teaching and learning. So yes, there's an awful lot happening in schools, and I understand that. But again, if you look at it as an investment and developing the capabilities of the individual to lift their own ability to lift and take that responsibility, it takes the burden off you and it becomes shared. And therefore it becomes this combined journey. They develop the toolbox as well, so they can use the tools, and they're not coming to you all the time saying, what do I need to do? How do I do this? You have to, all on the teacher. So I think if we go back to understanding it is about teaching and learning, not just teaching, and then how are we helping them be learner capable through their voice and sharing that with us.
And Justin, you're doing similar work with schools every day through the Relate program. What's your response when you hear we're at capacity, we too much going on?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think, like the content in Relate, but the content we're talking about today as well, I have a firm belief, but maybe the audience might tell me different, that, I believe that what we're talking about, educators actually believe in. Firstly, right? They do believe in this work of working with their students, building strong connection, hearing from them, giving them some ownership. But sometimes it's around, there's so many other pressures in schools that come at us. Sometimes we just need permission, firstly, to do the work, and for people to know this is a priority for us. And sometimes that's almost the first step, right? The first big jump in this work. I also thought of, as Sue was speaking then, one of the things we often hear, because we work across, like our schools, P to 12, so across that whole length. And it's amazing. I wonder if a lot of the secondary educators might agree with this in the room. And I'm wondering if the primary educators know that, if they work in those. But a lot of times once you get to senior school, common themes I hear about around, if I could have our students do anything, what would it be? And it's like, I wish they had more initiative in those senior schools. And I sit there and go, we've just had 10 years
Yeah.
to kind of build this. And I guess that's where Russ wasn't called agency, that the agency kind of comes in as well, or that, that third area around taking responsibility and to action, right? If we can build that as part of our definition and part of the work we do with students, I just wonder if I would hear that so often when we get to the upper secondary, right? It's just a question for me.
Can I just jump in and wholeheartedly agree with you there? I think that's the thing, that that it is what we want, and then we squash it because we're so concerned about getting it right. But of course, we're an imperfect world, and I think that's the key thing, is we're learning together. I see someone's question there about our framework, and our framework is listening first, so we understand who we're working with, and then we learn from each other, and we really start developing the skills, using each other to actually increase our understanding and our skills, using that diversity as a positive, to actually go, this is great, we've got a whole school of people I can learn from. And then that shared responsibility to lead. Yeah, what is my role in this? How do I actually contribute? If we do that from the prep, from 4 and 5-year-olds, and actually build that, and of course, actually they do come in believing that. And then it was Ken Robinson who said, and then we educate it out of them, and so what we want to do is actually keep that. We know the engagement level of kindergarten is near 95%, and by the time they're year 10, it's down to 34 or something. So what do we want to do is actually keep that enthusiasm, that motivation, to actually maintain throughout school, that you are a part of this. It's not something that's done too, but you are creating it with us. You are co-creating through your years of education, that we are partnering in this together.
And I imagine, Sue, relate, and I imagine in your work, but please correct me, right, that you actually find that half that work is affirming, because there is great work that educators are doing in schools, and sometimes they don't even realise it's voice.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's a lot of what I do, is actually point out that's voice. And then that's what the teachers, when we talk about intentionality, because the biggest thing is students are saying they don't listen. And yet you ask teachers, when do you listen? What are the things that you do to show that you're listening to students? They've got this huge long list. And then the students are going, nah, never happens. As I say, there I am unpacking student voice data with the students, and they're going, nah, we never get a chance. Then nobody listens to us. It's like, we're doing it right now. And yet they wouldn't engage with the activity. And it's like, you literally, when it's handed to you. So I think absolutely making it known, making it obvious to the students. Yeah, this is it. This is what is, when you do that, that's you using your voice. Or when you do that, that's you making noise. So actually, no, I don't listen. So you running around screaming that you're not going to come into school, I'm not listening to that, because that's noise. But if you actually say to me, I can't do this because I'm feeling this or this, then I'll listen. I'm ready to listen. And I'm ready to learn from you why you're having difficulties, and then let's work on this solution together.
Now, I'm conscious of the time because we've only got a couple of minutes left, and I want to make sure that we round out and conclude this well. But a couple of things, I'm just going to pop in the chat there, the links to the Quaglia Institute website and the links to the MacKillop Institute website as well for anyone who is maybe new to both of our organisations. Up on the screen, we have got a QR code as well for Quaglia Institute, and I've apologised in advance to Sue that I couldn't quite get the Quaglia Institute logo to fit on the PowerPoint slide for some reason. I have no idea why. Just didn't want to play ball with me. But that's there if you want to reach out to Sue, if you want to know more about the work of Dr. Russ Quaglia and the Quaglia Institute, that's there. And same for MacKillop as well. Sue and Russ very much work around that student voice space and leadership in schools. And then also, if you want to know a little bit more specifically about Relate, Justin has mentioned Relate a couple of times. That's one of our programs from here at the MacKillop Institute. There's a QR code on screen there where you can go directly to that page and find out more about the Relate program. But I think I really want to just round out by saying thank you so much to both Sue and Justin, and also to say thank you to everyone who has come along and joined us this afternoon. And thank you especially to Russ, who did join us all the way from the East Coast of the US and gave us some of his amazing insights. And it sounds like from the chat that lots of people have gained something from this, and that's a success for us. If everyone can walk away with one little insight that they'll continue to think about and reflect, then I think it's a successful webinar for all of us. And Sue, Justin, thank you so much again. Thank you to everyone for joining us. And Sue, Justin, any last kind of key takeaways or little kind of words of wisdom before we finish up?
I'm just thinking a huge thanks for the opportunity to have this conversation, because again, a lot of what we do is hidden, but it's like, yeah, we need to have these conversations to recognize this can address a lot of issues that we're trying to do if we actually partner with students.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sue. And Justin?
Yeah, I would say the same to all those people in schools. Have a great kind of end to term 3.
Yes.
And, very aware that your work is the most important work we do in education. That's the work with the children and young people. So if we could be of any assistance to that, I think we'd say, Sue, wouldn't we? We find that as a privilege. So thank you.
Yeah. And I think, just Sue's point, partnerships, none of us can do this alone. We're all in this together. We're all there for our young people and our children, and we can do so much more when we do it together and we work together. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming along this evening. We will send out a recording shortly, probably tomorrow, but look out for that email. Feel free to share the recording along to any of your colleagues as well, and please reach out to us if you have any questions. Thank you, and have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. See ya.